Today I'd like to encourage you to read 1 Corinthians chapter 10, verses 1 through 10. And our verse for the day is 1 Corinthians 10:10. That's easy to remember. And before I read it to you, though, I want to ask you, when you hear the word sin, what comes to mind? Are there particular sorts of sins that you think of? I'm giving you a second to think of them. Perhaps you think of sins that are mentioned in the Ten Commandments, for example, like you shall not murder, you shall not steal, you shall not commit adultery, right? Shall not bear false witness. Don't covet something or someone that doesn't belong to you. I wonder if I asked you to write down a list of sins, would you have remembered to include complaining? In 1 Corinthians 10:10, Paul is talking about, it's a part of a warning against complaining. And Paul is looking back at Israel's history, and he's sharing, and I'm going to talk about it today and tomorrow, two significant sins from Israel's history. And one of them is they just complain too much. And 1 Corinthians 10:10 is, and do not complain as some of them did, and were destroyed by the destroyer. Now, and he goes on to say, these things were written down to instruct us. Now, I'm guessing that many of us, if I said, write down 10 sins, write down 20 things that are sins, most people wouldn't say complaining. And yet, when we look back at Israel's experience in the Exodus, what did they do against God? All the time. They just moaned and complained and whined, and eventually God had enough. Now, you hear me talk all the time about how God is gracious and merciful and slow to anger and abounding in steadfast love, but even God gets tired of hearing about complaining. I saw a cartoon once, and it was cartoon of an older woman in a church prayer circle, and the woman is saying, "Dear Lord, hear our prayers, even if a lot of them just sound like complaining and whining to me." And sometimes, we have to watch ourselves. How much of our language, how much of our communication would be categorized as just complaining? And someone once said, when I correct you or when I complain, I do it because it's good to get things off my chest. When you do it, I remind you that complaining doesn't help anyone. Generally speaking, complaining doesn't help much. And I want to distinguish between complaining, which is frankly just moaning and groaning, in my opinion, without lifting a hand to try to fix the situation or to find a solution. Whenever you find yourself complaining or criticizing, always ask yourself, what could I do and what can I do to make this particular situation better? Helping to be a part of the solution is always preferable to just complaining about whatever is taking place. And when you pray to God, it's okay to lament, but it's also important always to remember to praise and give thanks. It's better for our spirit. And God likes to hear some good news every now and then too, just like we do.